Here on 2 now, A Night In with Alan Bennett. Over the next 2 months, BBC 2 is showing a major retrospective of the work of playwright Alan Bennett. To launch the season, Alan Bennett chooses his perfect evening's viewing from the archives. In 40 minutes, you can see Bob and Terry in a classic episode from Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads. That's followed by Abigail's Party.
Oh, isn't he crying?
Mike Lee's satirical view of suburban life, starring Alison Steadman.
I won't be a sec, I'm just going to the toilet, all right?
Then there's music in a monitor film from 1965 about the celebrated conductor Sir John Barbarolli. And to round off the night in, Days at the Beach, a haunting drama by Malcolm Mowbray. But first, Alan Bennett shares his thoughts on 39 years of watching television.
To be required to look back on television is like being asked, what are your memories of the hall stand? Or when you think of the 50s, what role was played by the sideboard? Television is, after all, part of the furniture, and in those early days, very much part of it. Embedded in cabinets, behind doors, disguised much as the commode used to be disguised. Looks like a chair, it's actually a lavatory. And people were slightly shamefaced about television when it came in, just as they were about the radio 20 years before. And of course some people are still a bit shamefaced about it now. No, we don't watch the old telly box very much. Quite frankly, we're far too busy. I mean, we watch Yes Minister, of course, is marvellously funny, and Inspector Morse and the news, but quite honestly, where does one find the time? The sad thing is that it's very often those kind of people to whom it falls to legislate about television. The Herds, the Rentons, the Rees-Moggs of this world, not the people of whom television is a lifeline and an educator and an eye-opener.
And now, here comes Her Majesty.
In common with most of my generation, the first sight I had of television was the coronation in 1953. I was on leave from the army and watched it at a friend's house. These days, I suppose, the ceremony would probably be sponsored, though not by Murdoch newspapers. But one would probably have to pay for the privilege of watching it.
And so, they've seen the Queen on her coronation day. A memory that's going to live surely with those children for their lives.
As so often with the central rituals of English life, I was in two minds about it all. Yes, the pageantry was moving, the music thrilling, but I was a soldier, and I knew there was no pageantry without a great deal of bullying. Poor sods, one thought. All that drill, then up at 4 in the morning to be screamed at by some strutting sergeant major. It's what I always feel about the trooping of the colour. Oh no, he's quite wrong, you see, because the men love it. They love it. In 1953, I could do an imitation of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher. I here present unto you Queen Elizabeth, your undoubted Queen. Wherefore all you who are come this day to do your homage and service, are you willing to do the same?
Are you willing to do the same?
Archbishop Fisher had, earlier in his career, been headmaster of Repton, the inheritor of the See of St. Augustine, a keen beater of boys' bottoms.
Oh, it's getting hot, now!
While not quite a Jimmy Edwards or the Reverend B.T.M. Smackett, I think I suspected at the time he was an old humbug, and he's always been for me emblematic of the establishment. An able man, a safe pair of hands, and not a whiff of self-doubt. That mixture of hypocrisy and self-assurance that will always take you to the top in English public life. Before television, what held us together as a nation was the wireless, and of course, the pictures. The first time I remember becoming helpless with laughing was watching George Formby in a film about some money hidden in some chairs.
Now, for my next experiment, I should like to have a little music. Watch. 1, 2, 3, and here we come. Now, this is really something very wonderful. This magic is not all that it appears to be. For example, you see things that you do not see, and you see things that you should not see. For instance, here is something which appears to be a very deceptive affair. There, you see the front, you see the back, you see the sides, you see all through it. There is nothing there, but there is, and here it is. That's that. Of course, I'm a conjurer because I come of a conjuring family. My father was a conjurer.
On the wireless, the famous humour of Tommy Handley left me cold, and still does.
Come to the fair, tuppence.
That kind of relentless chirpiness never raises a smile, and even as a child of 7, I found it very wearing.
The big thingamajig, the Sphinx, something awful.
Looking back, I realised what I disliked about this kind of humour were gags, which is hardly surprising because, as often as not, I just didn't understand them.
Excuse me, just a minute. Here, listen. Have you seen 1,000 soldiers go this way?
No, I've seen a cartload of monkeys pass this way.
Well, have you fallen off?
What?
Hey, listen. Which is the West End of a policeman?
Never heard of it.
It said in the paper this morning, policeman bitten by a dog in the West End. There'll be thousands of people in London tomorrow.
What for?
They live here.
Now, look here, you won't live very long if you don't get out.
Are you the fire brigade?
Rob Wilton, though, did make me laugh, because I'd come across people like him.
What's the matter?
Quick, do come along, boss. There's a house on fire.
House on fire? What's the address, lady? What address is it?
Grimshaw Street.
Grimshaw Street. Now, wait a minute. I know it as well as can be, and I can't just place it.
Oh, come along. It's only just down there.
No. Don't tell me. Let me think of it myself. Grimshaw. Oh, isn't that annoying? I could walk straight to it, and I can't think of it.
It's next to Whiteley Street.
Next to Whiteley. Oh, I know it as well as can be. Grimshaw. What's the number, lady? What number is it?
78.
78. Turned out nice again today, hasn't it?
Men didn't talk like this. Men didn't really talk at all in Leeds, but women did. Held firmly by my mother's hand and longing to get away, I'd heard so many women telling tale, as my father called it, and to hear Rob Wilton making fun of it was a kind of liberation. One was at least in the same world.
He said, I'll punch your head. I said, whose? He said, yours. I said, mine. He said, yes. I said, oh. He said, want to fight? I said, who? He said, you. I said, me. He said, yes. I said, no. So we then got to words, and he said, you're a cad. I said, cad. He said, yes. I said, who? He said, who? I said, yes. He said, you. I said, oh. So, of course, then I knew.
The first theatre I ever went into was the Leeds Theatre Royal, a delightful blue and gold Victorian theatre, now not merely demolished, but the building that replaced it demolished too. Each year we were taken by my grandma to see the pantomime, still going strong in May, and we would climb the wooden stairs to the gallery, where the steepness of the auditorium never failed to startle, so that you felt like gulls perched on a cliff face. At the Royal I saw Mother Goose, starring Norman Evans, who had no teeth and a little panda puppet, the tradition of toothlessness still happily surviving today in Les Dawson.
I mean, we never had this trouble with Sir Malcolm, you know.
Norman Evans always incorporated his music hall act into the panto.
Well, you know, I haven't been well myself. I haven't, honestly. I keep begging along, you know, but with me, well, no, I keep having them hot sweats, you know. It does. It takes it out of you, you know. And these men, they don't. They don't know what it is. No, well, he's the same. It's a funny thing, you know. I was only saying last week. That's giving me a belt. That's the third time on the same brick this week, you know. I'll have to watch myself.
It may be fanciful, but I see in this childhood preference for the familiar some hint of the stuff I later came to write for television, plays of ordinary life, dull lives, as I originally planned to call talking heads. Sir William Haley, once editor of the Times and a former Director General of the BBC, said of newspapers that to be popular, they need do no more than to be accurate. Whether that's true of newspapers nowadays, I'm not sure. Nobody could accuse the Sun of being accurate. But it's certainly true of comedy, when accuracy of dialogue and precision of observation are half the battle. And there's no need for gags. Very often one can just tell the tale. I was once visiting a relative in hospital and she had depression. We were walking down the long central corridor of the hospital, which was empty except for a woman coming towards us. As she drew near, my relative said, "Do you see this woman coming down here? She's tried to commit suicide 3 times. Hello." That story's more social documentary than it is a joke, though even so it's quite close to Norman Evans. And that the two could coexist and be funny and also moving first came home to me in 1959, when I saw Dennis Mitchell's documentary, Morning in the Streets.
So Madge said to me she thought that the budgie was egg-bound. And I said, well, we'll have to do something about it, because it'll die if we don't. I said, have you got a book on budgie? She said, no. So she sent the boy out to buy a book, and we did what we could for it. So she rang me up the next day, told me there was no eggs, rang me up the next day, no eggs. So I said to her, well, you better take it to the university and have it seen to there. So she said, oh, I can't do that. She said, it says in the budgie book, you've got to keep them in the one heat. If I take it out in the cold, it'll get pneumonia and die. So anyway, she got a vet in to have a look at it. And Shep, the dog, followed her in. And he goes to the cage to get the budgie out. Opens the cage, the budgie flies out. A light's on the mat. The dog jumps on it. And no budgie. He picks it up, the vet, looks at it. He said, this budgie's not egg-bound. He said, it's got a tumour. And with that, he just threw it in the fire. So Madge says, good heavens, she says, my lads will go mad. What did you do that for? He said, well, cremation is the most hygienic thing, madam. That will be 7 and 6.
That process had begun, unique to television, whereby we began to learn not only how the other half lived, but how they talked. And so the nation was introduced to itself. There's a character here who goes for a job. The foreman looks at me and says, well, I don't know. You see, you're too heavy for light work, and you're too light for heavy work. I said, what you mean is I'm neither use nor ornament. He said, you're not. And that's not Rob Wilton. That's Morning in the Streets.
I was a big baby, and I was a fat little girl, a fat school girl, a fat young woman, and now I'm a fat old woman. Happy days.
But we're all part of a great mass. This great mass is just split up into little bits. We're the little bits. I'm part of you, you're part of me.
What Dennis Mitchell understood was that the best television could get close enough to show how different people were, and therefore how similar. Just the opposite of the worst television, which, because it never gets close to anything, is able to pretend we're all the same anyway. Quiz shows work on this principle, and so does Blind Date, all purveying a kind of synthetic life. One good rule of thumb is to expect nothing of any programme that involves bringing the whole family into the studio. Morning in the Streets hit home on all sorts of levels. One sequence shows boys picking sides, and I remember mentioning it at the time to Russell Harty, who long before he was a television personality was still teaching in Blackburn. As boys, we'd both of us been generally the last to be picked, whatever the game, and Russell remembered one instance when both sides had been chosen, and he was still left while the two leaders dithered. At length, the master in charge lost patience. Right, he said, you have him. Oh, no, sir, no, sir. We had him last week, sir. It was the story of both our lives.
Unfortunately, I can't keep sex out of my poems. It would be hypocritical for me to do so. You can't get away from the beauty of the girls.
What strikes me, looking at these programmes from the 50s and 60s, is the innocence of people. How hopeful they look, how trusting in their limitless future. In a play I wrote, a woman is looking at a photograph of herself when young. Oh, she says, if only I'd known. Known what, someone asks. Oh, just known. I suppose what she's talking about is time, and how everybody's fooled by it in the end. In Mike Apted's 7 Up series on Granada, he followed and is still following a group of people through their lives.
When I grow up, I want to be an astronaut. But if I can't be an astronaut, I think I'll be a coach driver.
This is probably linked up with the fact now that I want to travel. I mean, my thoughts haven't really changed differently. So I definitely wouldn't like to be a coach driver now.
I suppose yes, well, I would like to be somebody in a position of importance. I've always thought this. But I don't think I'm the right sort of person to carry the responsibility for whatever it is. I always thought, well, I'd love to be, possibly even love to be in politics or something like this. But I suppose that I'd probably find that just as tedious as all the other jobs I've done. So.
All the things I always thought I could do. I could give lectures on erudite subjects that I'd read all about, or I could work in the theatre, perhaps lighting or directing a show.
And is all that lost to you?
Does seem to be, yes.
Can you think what you're likely to be doing in the year 2000?
And that's a horrible question. I tend to think the most likely answer is that I'll be wandering homeless around the streets of London. But with a bit of luck, that would happen.
That was a tale of hopes disappointed, of ambitions not realised, and it's almost unbearably sad. But there are others in the series whose youthful ambitions are fulfilled and who end up exactly where they wanted to be. But they seem sad too. The fulfilment of hope almost as desolate as its disappointment. And that is time. As Auden, whom we'll see in a moment, wrote, "In headaches and in worry vaguely life leaks away, and time will have his fancy tomorrow or today."
Plunge your hands in water, plunge them in up to the wrist, stare, stare on the basin, and wonder what you've missed.
Much of the stuff I've written for television has been about the North, and I've always been in headlong flight from what might be called the Ecky Thump version of Northern life. Portraying the North has always had its perils. Even in the early 50s, the Northern epic was becoming a joke. Frank Muir and Dennis Norton's radio programme, Take It From Here, had a parody of the film The Crowthers of Bank Dam, a saga of northern mill-owning folk. Jimmy Edwards was the mill owner, and Dick Bentley his liberal-minded son. "There's trouble at mill." "Trouble at mill? What about?" "Workers are complaining they've too far to come to work." "Too far to come to work? Why? They've not but 3 fields to cross." "Aye, but they're Huddersfield, Macclesfield and Sheffield." Northern mill-owning folk got another drubbing 30 years later in the Granada series Brass.
You see how it is, Mr. Hardacre. Feelings are running high. I've told them it's all nonsense, but they'll not hear reason. It's this rumour about the cottage hospital.
What about cottage hospital?
Well, the story is, Mr. Hardacre, I give it no credit myself, but the story is you're going to pull it down.
Would I pull it down? It's my works as keeps that hospital in business. Our mines alone supply half the patients in there.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hardacre. You've certainly set us minds at rest.
Have we a word? Bring your cap when you speak to your betters.
I have no cap. I'll not come capping onto this house.
It would have been appropriate at this point to show a parody of a Monitor documentary on the life of a Northern writer that Patrick Garland and I made back in 1966. But of course it's been wiped. It went something like this. He often goes back to the Doncaster he knew as a boy and where his first novel was written. We were all miners in our family. My father was a miner, my mother is a miner. These are miners' hands. But we were all artists, I suppose, really. Only I was the first one who had this urge to express myself on paper rather than at the cold face. But under the skin, I suppose, I'm still a miner. I suppose in a very real sense, I'm a minor writer. Miners are very strong, very tough, but in a way very gentle creatures. But because they're very strong and very tough, they can afford to be very gentle. Just as being very gentle, they can also be very tough. It's a vicious circle, really, but with all the viciousness taken out of it. I don't know whether you've ever looked into a miner's eyes, for any length of time, that is, because it is the loveliest blue you've ever seen. I think perhaps that's why I live in Ibiza, because the blue of the Mediterranean, you see, reminds me of the eyes of those Doncaster miners. Writing a play or a novel, there's nothing to be seen. It's not like dry stone walling. The sad fact is that writing is simply sitting in a room, doing it, or not doing it. The charms of this, if you want to make a documentary, are soon exhausted. It's just a typing head. And naturally, filmmakers try and beef it up a bit. Now, with a northern writer, or an Irish one, this isn't difficult. Hence the slag heaps, the mill chimneys and moors or whatever. But with a southern or suburban writer, shots of him or her at the chiropodist, say, or slipping down to the confectioner's, don't carry quite the same charge. But whether from Hounslow or Halifax, when a writer tries to let you in on the sources of his inspiration, give you a glimpse of the raw material, as it were, all too often the result seems patronising and a bit queasy. A writer's normal situation is to be in two minds, because that's where the poetry or whatever comes from. But doubting and dithering doesn't make good television. To be opinionated and dogmatic is far more viewable than that uncertainty that normally goes with creation.
When it came to prose, the English common man knows what prose is. He talks it all the time himself, and he wasn't going to be taken in. And there were a lot of Americans, headed by one called Gertrude Stein, who wrote absolute gibberish. And they hired a poor dotty Irishman called James Joyce. I've never heard about him, but he was thought to be a great influence in my youth.
Was he?
And
yes.
he wrote absolute rot, you know. He began writing quite well, and you could see him going mad as he wrote, and his last books only fit to be set for examinations at Cambridge.
Actually, when you think of it, trying to put writing on television isn't all that different from showing cooking. Here's one I prepared earlier, safest for the poet as well as the cook.
Eyes look into the well, tears ran down from the eye. The tower cracked and fell from the quiet winter sky. Under a midnight stone, love lies buried by thieves. The robbed heart begs for a bone. The damned rustle like leaves. Face down in the flooded brook, with nothing left to say, lies one the soldiers took and spoiled and threw away.
It's an extraordinary face. David Hockney did some drawings of Auden and afterwards said, as I was doing all these lines, I kept thinking, well, if that's what his face is like, what must his balls be like? What the public expects of authors is that they should be able instantly to give of their essence, be as we know they are from their books. This is a tall order, and on television writers counterfeit a presence, put on an act.
Have you ever brooded on what appears to you to be unjust or adverse criticism?
No, I'm afraid if someone praises me, I think what an ass, and if they abuse me, I think what an ass.
And if they say nothing about you at all and take no notice of you?
That's the best I can hope for.
You like that when it happens to you?
Yes.
Why are you appearing in this program?
Poverty.
Had you any...
Evelyn Waugh used to affect a suit of violent tweed, but it was just as much a uniform and a disguise as Larkin's raincoat or Betjeman's pork pie hat.
Snow falls in the buffet of Aldersgate Station. Soot hangs in the tunnel in clouds of steam. City of London, before the next desecration, let your steepled forest of churches be my theme.
Beyond all this, the wish to be alone,
However the sky grows dark with invitation cards, however we follow the printed directions of sex, however the family is photographed under the flagstaff, beyond all this, the wish to be alone.
Sliding down slag heaps, clambering over bomb sites, wandering by canals, there's nothing that these seasoned performers have not been asked to do by enterprising documentary makers. And like tired old elephants, they obligingly go through their tricks, including the trick practiced by war, in which they seem fierce about having to do it. As Philip Roth says, there's nothing more wearing than pretending to be the author of one's books, except pretending not to be. I'm not sure Stevie Smith is pretending to be anybody here, except maybe Richard III.
Nobody heard him, the dead man, but still he lay moaning. I was much further out than you thought, and not waving, but drowning. Poor chap, he always loved larking, and now he's dead. It must have been too cold for him. His heart gave way, they said. Oh, no, 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 it was too cold always. Still the dead one lay moaning. I was much too far out all my life, and not waving, but drowning.
In the last resort, what the public wants from the writer on television is that something he or she hasn't put in the shop window, something that's been kept back. The pain that's behind the novels, the loss hinted at in the poems, a wretched marriage, a broken heart, some secret that has to be snuffled out by the trained truffle hound.
I believe you keep a diary. You intend not to publish until you're dead.
Well, you know, it's very personal. It refers to a lot of people. There's nothing, no scandal in it, but it's nevertheless intimate.
Thank you, Mr. Isherwood.
Christopher Isherwood in 1959, stonewalling, or, if you like, playing a straight bat. In 1961, I had supper with Isherwood. I was in Beyond the Fringe at the time, which he'd seen and been very taken with the Anglican sermon I parodied. Near the prep school they both attended, he and Auden had found a deserted quarry where they gave similar sermons and held mock speech days, and Isherwood wanted to tell me about it. Once we were through that, though, I couldn't think of much to say. At the time, I still thought of shyness as a virtue, instead of, as now, a rather boring affliction, and I look back on that meal as a wasted opportunity. Isherwood was with his companion of many years, the much younger Don Bacardi. It was unusual in 1961 to find a couple so openly living together, particularly with such an age difference. That, I imagine, was what Robert Robinson was trying unsuccessfully to make Isherwood acknowledge. It's just the kind of revelation the public wants, believing as they do that life explains art. Writers know it doesn't, quite. And it's a game, if they've any sense, they don't play. We've seen Evelyn Waugh interviewed by John Freeman on Face to Face. Another of his victims was Tony Hancock.
There's a bit of obscurity about this, but it seems as if 3 times in recent years you've had some sort of a breakdown in health. Is this true? Is your health a bit ropey?
Oh, no, I don't think so. This is mainly from the Adelphi. This stems from one occasion at the Adelphi. I was there for, I went in as a replacement, and I went in too quickly, and the act that I had wasn't particularly good, and we were doing twice a night, and the show ran for 2 years, and the act was a little dodgy, shall we say, and if I didn't work absolutely to pitch every performance, it didn't go very well, so I had to force myself into this position. And eventually it just sort of wore me out, and I went off for a month, that's all.
Did you in fact have a health breakdown earlier, well, last year, last autumn, or not?
That was purely and simply, there is a thing that sometimes happens in this business. I have a lot of dialogue to learn every week, and sometimes if you get onto the sort of vicious circle of getting too tired to learn, and then not sleeping because you're worried that you're not learning, you eventually come down to this, and I had a week off and a sort of sleep, and it was all right again.
It's often said of you...
It was this sad interview that helped set Hancock on the road that led to his martyrdom on the altar of comedy. It's painful to watch, particularly since he doesn't seem at all self-regarding, but I still think it was a mistaken exercise. There's a lot of sentimental tosh in the myth of the sad clown, which has lately been stretched to accommodate both Benny Hill and Frankie Howard, neither of whom were much sadder than most men are in late middle age. But comedians, in Philip Larkin's words, are forever surprising a hunger in themselves to be more serious. It isn't entirely their fault, as television likes to analyse the appeal of its stars in order to give them intellectual dignity, which is the last thing they need. It's best to resist these intellectual blandishments, or, like Morecambe and Wise, incorporate the intellectual pretensions into the act.
As you know, Dame Claude, I've written the most brilliant play, and I've written it specially for you, and I've called it...
You've got my coat on, Mr. Wise.
You've got my coat on, Mr... No, that's not... No, Oh, I'm terribly sorry, Dame Claude. Take this coat off, you fool! Somehow, really. I must apologise, Dame.
You have one like this, haven't you?
Could you give me a little more detail about your play? I don't wish to hurry you, but I do have a car waiting
Well,
outside.
of course. Well, my play...
Cigar, sir?
Oh, yes. I always smoke a cigar about this time. I smoke about 20 a day. Thank you very much.
One of your perks?
One of my perks, of course. About my play, Dame Florida, yes, it's an historical play. It takes place in the past.
Oh, yeah.
Could I have the keys to the wine cabinet?
The keys to the wine cabinet? Yes, certainly. It's in my pocket here.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Dame Flora. I'm sorry about that. As I was saying, Dame Flora, I'm one of your most ardent admirers. I think I'm one of your most ardent admirers, and I must say, I'd be in the...
Like Ernie, who longs to write plays, I've always wanted to write a sitcom and never managed it. It's a skill that's critically, though not financially, undervalued. A good sitcom is every bit as taxing to write as a good play. What's notable is that the subsidiary characters are often more undilutedly funny than the main ones.
Now, that is a miracle.
If you so much as sniggers, I'm going straight back indoors.
Margot and Jerry were funnier than Tom and Barbara because they didn't have to carry the burden of the plot and could just be their own terrible, unchanging selves.
After all, what are friends for? Mind you, this will be the first and last time, so make good use of me.
Right, run a beans in the box, please.
Even in Dad's Army, where all the characters are character actors, the vicar and the verger were always a special delight, simply because their relationship, fawning verger, Mr. Yateman, and irritable vicar, never altered.
In order to speed our deliberations, I have made a short list of the elements that have to come together to make a successful turkey dinner.
Oh, trust him to make it long-winded.
Don't you start, Mr. Hodges, don't you start. He's a troublemaker, he is, sir.
I don't understand why he has to be here at all.
Mr. Hodges has booked the hall for this
What?
evening. It's only because he released it that you could have this meeting at all.
I think we ought to propose a vote of thanks to Mr. Hodges. Don't you, Your Reverence?
No, I don't. Please sit down, otherwise we shall be here all night.
Queen of such subsidiary characters was Joan Sanderson, who died a few weeks ago. She was the kind of character actress the English stage is particularly rich in, and which makes it all the sadder that we've no film industry to speak of. She was too subtle for carry-ons, too funny for Merchant Ivory.
I don't want
I first came across her as Miss Yule in Please, Sir.
You in Australia? That's the funniest thing I've ever heard.
Funny?
I'm sorry, but really I mean to say, you in Australia, you're far too old. It would be silly.
Silly? I came to you especially. The most important decision of my life, hoping that you would at least, well, influence my judgment.
Look, I've got a vestigial calyx.
Vestigial calyx. And that's you. Now, I've reserved a very quiet room with a bath and a sea view. I specifically asked for a sea view in my written confirmation, so please make sure I have it.
Okay.
What?
K.
K?
C.
C. Casey? Casey, what are you trying to say?
No. K what?
K what?
C. K what?
CK what?
Yes.
Who is CK what?
K.
Is it the manager, Mr. What?
Oh, manager.
He is.
Ah, Mr. 40.
What?
40.
What are you talking about yourself? Dinner's at 7:15, except for Mondays when there's a high tea at 6:30. If you'd like a drink before dinner, there's a bottle of sherry, but I don't encourage it.
Is there any chance of a cup of tea, Miss Wilbraham?
Tea was at 4:45.
By this stage, you're perhaps becoming aware that there isn't much connection in all this. It seemed to start off as a lecture, and now it's turned into something of a lucky dip. And you'd be quite right, of course. It is a lucky dip. But that's one of the great virtues of television.
She's a ginormous sow, isn't it? Hairy old beast, isn't
all
it? Not
over.
like ours at all, are they?
That's right.
There's a definite, ham outline there,
Yes.
and not just a filled-in lump of blubber.
Yes, so it's actually sort of... I always think those old cattle prints were exaggerated,
Yes.
and the beast never actually looked like what it showed on the print. But I think on this, that pig is pretty realistic. He's done it very lifelike.
The pig's a pig, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, and it's got a nice curly tail there.
Yeah.
That was part of one of the 2-minute chats on Rembrandt shown recently between programmes on BBC Two. There were others on Magritte, and I hope there'll be lots more on all sorts of subjects. They're the TV equivalent of sticking a few rockery plants in between the paving stones where they take the eye. Nobody discovered Rembrandt through the recent grand exhibition at the National Gallery, simply because to attend they had to make a decision and then stump up £5 for a ticket. So they knew what they were after before they went. Someone catching these 2-minute snatches has no expectations, and so just might be hooked.
That pig would have had a heck of a lot of flavour.
Absolutely.
That would have eaten beautifully, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You can just imagine.
Lovely crackling on it.
Lovely crackling, yeah. If a little hairy.
If a little hairy.
That television should endeavour to educate and inform is jeered at nowadays, particularly on the right. The official philosophy is that we're all customers, and when we switch on we know exactly what we want. Hence there should be sport on one channel, pop on another, and though its eminently respectable proponents like Mr. Hurd don't actually like to say this, pornography on another. The analogy is with a greengrocer's, say, or a dry cleaner's. But even if we accept this scaled-down version of human aspiration, man as simply customer, the proper analogy, surely, is with a supermarket, where the customer comes across items he was not expecting to be interested in, didn't in fact come in to purchase, but which take his or her eye. A snatch of David Attenborough, say, when you'd switched on for Ross Abbott. A quick blast of Magritte when what you thought you were getting was Maigret.
See this? This is called the Lovers. You don't exactly need 3 guesses to see what this pair had in common, do you? Blind date, right enough, eh? Of course, some people think this is symbolic, but no if you live round my way, boy. God, half a coven walks about with blankets at their heads. Mostly when they're getting in and out of police motors, I admit. And of course, speaking as a lover, I do often find that Mary is apt to pamp the odd paper bag over my head when I do the business.
With a limited number of channels, TV is still a topic of discussion. A play or a documentary talked about the morning after at work or wherever. But the more channels there are, the less this is going to be the case. Of course, if there's no such thing as society, then this is of no consequence. But the very same people who make a fuss about the nation losing its identity in Europe are quite happy to see national television lose its identity and go the European way, so that we end up with a diet of pap and crap such as they get in France or Italy. As some ninny on the Sunday Telegraph said when broadcasting changes were first mooted in 1988, when Mrs. Thatcher's satellite revolution comes, it will be rare for an entire saloon bar or dinner party to have all watched the same television programme the night before. There will then be a healthy decline in the importance of the programme chiefs. There will also be an unhealthy decline in the programmes didn't seem to concern him. One wants to ask such people, what is it that you think helps to hold the nation together? A shared interest in the novels Lord Archer? He's on about Geoffrey Archer now, dear. Sheer envy. Spoils himself by bringing politics into it. Ah, well. I'm getting to the age when one looks back and wonders if life would have been different had more of it been spent under a government one could respect, let alone agree with. A feeling never stronger than in the 80s, when the jeering at civilized values seemed to warp one's life. And before one could get started in a morning, the day's quota of brute government had to be shrugged off first.
Piece by piece, the regalia are placed upon the altar, being handed to the Archbishop and by him to the Dean of Westminster.
What I suppose I feel about our governors, to whom it falls to legislate about television, feel as I did long ago about that emblematic figure of Geoffrey Fisher, is that they are something I've never managed or hoped to be, and that is grown up. They're grown-ups in the cradle, grown-ups as schoolboys or schoolgirls, grown-ups as adults, and children only in their dotage. For them, their second childhood is actually their first. I don't think Bob and Terry in Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads are ever going to be grown up either, though Bob thinks he is, which is one of the reasons why it's so funny. The episode I've chosen is called Countdown.
Quite frankly, I don't think the church is going to be big enough.
Weddings. A 10-hour marathon spent Weddings. A 10-hour marathon spent milling around in a damp marquee having wadges of marzipan thrust at you and a video camera poked in your eye. All costing some punter half the annual trade deficit, but never mind. Jolly good time had by all. Well, never again.
I'm sure you don't mind being best man cop.
Mel Smith lets his hair down. Colin Sandwich, Tuesday, 8:30 on 2.
Are you all right? Brilliant.
The next programme I've chosen is Abigail's Party, Mike Leigh's account of a ghastly evening in suburbia. Mike Leigh taps a level below dialogue as it's generally written, though once you hear it, it's instantly real and recognisably awful. A verbal muzak that's hilarious in a play, but deeply dreary in life. The chief delight of the play is, of course, Alison Steadman's hulking performance as Beverly, the brutal hostess with shoulders like a lifeguard and a walk to match. The only puzzle about her is how she's managed to escape strangulation so long. I'd run a mile from all these characters, though I particularly like John Salthouse as the smouldering Tony, who says very little, but speaks volumes.
I was all right on the Wednesday until lunchtime, at which point all my nice little routine went out of the window.
I think we all ought to share.
Share? You've only got 2 scrushy little sandwiches. I've got some spice cake.
It was one of what I call my all walks of life luncheons. Today we had the head of the CBI, an Olympic swimmer, a primary school headmistress, a general in the Salvation Army, and Glenda Jackson. It's a bit sticky.
A season of Alan Bennett plays opens next Sunday on BBC Two.
man is under stress. You must understand that.
He was my friend.
Most of the orchestral music I know I heard before I was 20, largely at concerts in Leeds, so that my enjoyment of music nowadays carries with it a strong charge of reminiscence. This has its drawbacks. Underneath Cuthbert Broderick's magnificent Victoria Hall, where I went to concerts most Saturday nights, was in those days a municipal restaurant, the smell from which tended to mingle with the music. Even today, I can't hear Delius's walk to the Paradise Garden without the lingering odour of fish and chips. It was a strong hint that, born in Leeds, one was going to have a hard job turning into Proust. The riches of the BBC Arts Archive make the choice of a documentary difficult, but I've settled for one about Barbarolli, made in 1965 by the young Melvyn Bragg. Before that, though, we're going to see some extracts from John Drummond's 1968 tribute to Kathleen Ferrier.
Few English singers achieved so much in so short a career, and few are remembered with such affection. Though gramophone records can reproduce the unmistakable sound of her voice, they can only hint at the personality behind it. And that, as much as the artistry, is what counted.
Hers, while it was an extraordinary life, conforms in a profound way to what the public expects an artist's life to be. Born in Blackburn, she was a talented amateur pianist who worked as a telephonist at the post office. She had no thoughts of a musical, let alone a singing career, until for a dare she entered a singing competition at the Carlisle Music Festival. Soon she was performing professionally, and in 1943 sang in Messiah in Westminster Abbey, where she was heard by Benjamin Britten.
Here was a voice that could sing this extremely awkward music without any effort. I mean, just in the part of the voice which is usually the weakest, Kathleen's voice was the strongest. And so the music sailed across the vast spaces with a confidence and a beauty which I think I'd never heard before.
A few years later, at the height of her fame, she was struck down with cancer.
The marvellous thing about this Olympian fortitude of this wonderful person, that as it grew nearer and nearer to the end, she became greater and greater, as if, you might say, the range that this must fulfill itself before it left, and it did.
An artist struck down, as Kathleen Ferrier was, at the height of her powers, is a dreadful tragedy. And yet, in an awful way, it fulfills what the public expects. To be endowed with such talent seems unfair to those not so blessed. We call it a gift, yet somehow, somewhere, we expect it to be paid for. Paid for in unhappiness, paid for in poverty and deprivation, paid for in an early or a painful death. And when it is, however tragic, something in us is satisfied. The gift has been redeemed.
I do know she's been dead 15 years, I think. And still, when I go abroad, all that I meet speak about her with what I would call an affectionate awe and wonder. Now that is the uniqueness of her. We don't produce that